Today on the Learn It, Use It podcast.
We have virtual EOCs now, where we have people connected all over the world in our operations centers, and it's instant. So any global event, from a natural disaster to a mass shooting, wildfires, all that is instant notification. And so with a virtual environment, you have all your ESFs, your emergency support functions, capable of collaborating just right there on the computer. They could be in their house, but they're communicating, an emergency situation instantly with their partners, and creating that there's not the delay that maybe we would have seen in that past,
Yeah, we're waiting for people to show up.
Right.
The EOC would stand up because
Yeah.
an incident would happen, and then you're waiting for, two people that were an hour away
Mm-hmm.
for them to show up because
Yep.
they're the ones that had the duty of the day or
Mhm.
whoever, and they're not there, so
Mhm.
you're missing the link where you
Yeah.
can instantaneously do that.
Yeah, and the quality of communication now.
This podcast is by the Operations Management and Engineering Management programs in the College of Engineering at the University of Arkansas. In our programs, we stand by Learn It Today, Use It Tomorrow. The instructors for our courses are professionals with real-world experience where you will be able to immediately apply what you have learned. Today's workforce is changing rapidly, and all fields require adapting to new environments, which means you need new credentials quickly to improve your current performance. Our graduate programs and certificates apply to all industries so you can be competitive in today's workforce.
All right, welcome to today's podcast, and I think we've got one this month that'll be of interest to a lot of people, especially people that are looking to either transition or have had some interest in the different areas, particularly in security operations. And today we're very lucky that we have Mikaela Felcher with us, who's a security manager at Walmart. I guess that's the exact title. And she's also an adjunct instructor for our Master of Science in Operations Management, teaching specifically courses around the Homeland Security certificate, graduate certificate that we have, which is, one of the strengths of the program because we have people with real-world experience, and they bring that experience into the classroom. So more than 20 years of experience. You never know. I mean, it's 40-something for me, but anyway, more than 20 years of experience in security operations, including the military and industry now, and you're the incoming chair of the local chapter of the American Society of Industrial Security, which, we'll talk about a little bit later about why that's important and making those connections. So, okay, welcome to the podcast first off, and let's just start. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey, and a little bit about your current role, and when we'll talk more about the courses later.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Rich. Thanks for that introduction. So my journey into the world of security started when I was in the U.S. Army, as you mentioned, over 20 years. Recently retired from the Army in 2021 after almost 23 years in the Army. So while I was in the service, I took my first college class. I was deployed in Macedonia, and I believe it sticks out in my mind that first college class was Introduction to Terrorism. And I was like, okay, this is pretty interesting. There's people out here doing these things, plotting these things, and what are we doing to stop them? So that piqued my interest, where I continued college classes, and I attained my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. And then also, as a lot of people, some of our audience here are military members. They know that you have your main role. So I was actually a helicopter mechanic in the Army, but I was operating as additional duties as the physical security officer, ended up being the anti-terrorism officer for the unit as well. And so I was like, well, this pairs nicely with my formal education. And I decided to pursue that, on the outside. So I said, how else can I continue my education. So I decided to follow the Homeland Security route and got my master's in emergency management and Homeland Security. Made that transition over to the civilian world, where you just mentioned I work as a senior manager at Walmart here in Bentonville, Arkansas, is at the home office. So my role here now is I oversee all the security risk assessments for our non-retail facilities. So we have a separate team that focuses on, stores and security assessments for them. I handle all the other types of facilities we have there.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big job. I mean, most people in security, when they think retail, it's all about shrink and shoplifting and asset protection kind of things. But then the non-retail areas, people kind of miss the importance of that. So I think it'll be an interesting discussion for us to have today.
Exactly. Yeah.
So one of the things that I've had some great mentors that talk to me several times about, you got to get the basics down first. Whether as a pilot, first thing is you have an emergency, we'll fly the airplane first. Mm-hmm. A lot of people dealing with emergencies crash airplanes. Or in security, it's like pay attention to the basics. And so, but all that being said, we have all of these things that are changing. And one of the things that are changing and kind of the base model in security is physical security. So everything else we have, I'd make an argument, people would argue with me, but everything else kind of stems out of physical security. Mm-hmm. We kind of, even taken the physical security models and tried to morph them over into cybersecurity, mm-hmm. and we'll use these same things. And a lot of things in risk assessment or the use of the Carver method in the military. So all of it kind of comes mm-hmm. to there. So tell us a little bit about your perspective on physical security and what the challenges are that industry is facing now.
Yeah.
That we didn't have before.
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest challenges is even with this technology is how do you stay one step ahead of the bad guy? We can have all this technology out there, but are we applying it, in the right circumstances, and using it for our good? So there's artificial intelligence in pretty much everything we do now, even the technology with our cameras and our video management systems. So how do we apply that? Our weapons detection is one thing that's also evolving, that we, hopefully in the security industry, we're, again, staying ahead of the nefarious actors of stopping anything criminal before it can happen. It's a challenge. The other aspect too is you don't want to forget about the human element. You can have all this technology, right, Rich? But sometimes it's important to have that person there to even, who's monitoring it, mm-hmm. right? So the basics also are the people,
right?
The highly trained officers that we have too.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so that's a great example. I get, previous lives when I was working in Homeland and even in the Air Force, one of the things you'd see is CCTV, and you'd say, hey, what do you have for physical security and what kind of elements? You go, well, we have a response, and it's a CCTV, and they'd have one poor guy sitting in front of, and it was flashing 16 at a time, 20. I mean, he's monitoring 100. Mm-hmm. So those aren't really security. Those are investigative tools mm-hmm. to go back later and figure out who you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And in the case of terrorism, that's meaningless because they don't really care,
right?
Because they don't plan to survive it many times.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about that in particular, and where that technology is going, so you talk where do you think it's heading though? So in physical security, where do you think the technology is going? I mean, if you had a crystal ball, nobody's going to hold it to you, and we're not going to go back 3 years from now and say,
right.
hey, was she right or wrong? But I mean, where do you think the technology is going?
Wow. Good question. I really think we're heading towards the autonomy. That's the trend.
So do you think it's augmented? So, everybody's worried about kind of lassoing AI now because we're concerned. And so there's kind of this in between. There's this augmented.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a monitor. I sit here, and the autonomy of the AI just prioritize and filters to give me information, manageable information, because now we have crazy amounts of data, too much data to manage. Do you think it's there, or do you think there's actually going to be some the autonomy recognizes something and sends an alert out, or where do you think it's going to land? Let's say in the next 5 years.
Wow. I don't think we're there yet. It's slowly coming around. I think the mindset, of people to have their trust and their faith into that technology is the barrier here that we have to break through. Is that mindset?
Well, it's like self-driving cars, right?
Right.
You know, people, they'll say, "Oh my gosh, we had 100,000 hours in self-driving trucks and cars, and we've had 6 accidents," and everybody's like, "Oh my goodness!" But then if you compare that to the day-to-day driving, it's like 1,000 times better. So it's getting over that hump of acceptance that, yeah, it may not be perfect,
but look at the data.
But look at the data.
Right.
Exactly right. So it's interesting. I look forward to seeing. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there that are providing some pretty good, but I'd like to see what they do.
Yeah.
So let's go. I know that cybersecurity is not your deal, but let's talk a little bit about convergence. I started studying, writing papers, doing presentations several years ago about convergence.
Right.
Give us your perspective, and it's not just, it's autonomy, physical security, cybersecurity, about convergence and what someone needs to consider when they're looking at that.
So with the convergence, you have to have the dual aspect. You have to have the physical security talking, and by physical security, I've also seen some confusion out there where I'm not talking about a network. I'm talking about fences, badge access, locks on doors. So you still have to have that aspect of physical security to prevent access to your cyber network. To increase that. If you have that cybersecurity is top notch, but you have somebody that can walk into the building and flip a switch in your network in your server room,
right?
Then you've got a gap there,
right.
And then you're definitely you're lacking in some area of physical security, right?
Do you think that there's a tendency now for us to stop paying attention to physical security? Because there's a lot of shiny objects out there right now. And so when you do the basics of, we need a guard at the gate, or we need, these things, these age-old, do you think is it difficult to sell that?
It because you don't want to. It is, yes, because you don't want to instill more fear in people, right? So you don't want to have that overly, I guess, overprotective posture where somebody says, "Hey, why do we have guards out here? Is it really necessary?" So you have to have that balance, I think, of what's appropriate, what's necessary, level of security for that comes back to what's your level of risk. What are our threats? What are we protecting against, kind of thing.
Yeah, and so that's a great example of assessing risk ahead of time. There used to be this will be before your time, but when I was younger, they were just starting to come out with no cars had security systems on them. You didn't buy an automobile that had a security system, but you could add one. And so
I remember those days.
So and so people would have these, $800 cars at the time and spend $1,500 on a security system.
And a radio, too.
And the radio. They had more in the security system than the radio. Yeah. And so this return on investment idea on risk is one of the things that's pretty difficult. I mean, you could say, well, I leave expensive stuff in my car, so you could try to justify it.
Exactly.
But, I mean, it goes to your point, I think. Exactly that. So, So let's talk a little bit, and I'll preface it this. So, you know, back in, and I don't know about you, but I wasn't a security person until about 30 years ago. I got roped into doing, while I was still on active duty, doing FAA security because I was active duty. The Air Force had these agreements where we did the actual security, and then they certified it. And so I got kind of roped into it, and then it just grew. And then after September 11th happened, it was a skill set that I was like, oh, I'm glad I had that. But the pieces I think that are different is back then, especially in industry, almost exclusively the chief security officer would be a retired FBI at a large, at a Fortune 100 company. Retired FBI, retired chief of police, retired, and they had great law enforcement background, but not really security.
Right.
Which is interesting because some of the folks, good friends of mine in Israel, they would always criticize me, said, your problem is in the United States, you confuse law enforcement with security, and they're not the same. We think of them differently, which in the beginning I thought, I don't really understand what you're saying. Now I fully understand it 30 years later. But in those days, when you made a transition from the military or law enforcement or something else, nobody really had an expectation. It was like just, hey, security is security. But now you're asked to, hey, roll back this project and show me the net present value and the ROI. And so it's become more and more, and that's the reason we have a Homeland Security certificate to teach security professionals how to not just comply, but to do that. So talk some, someone's going to transition from the military as an example, or just wants to make a transition. What advice would you give them if they wanted to make that leap?
Biggest piece of advice is to build your network. Network. Easiest thing these days is LinkedIn. Jump on there and build some quality connections. And the true professionals, the ones that are out there, are very willing to help. You'll find some people might ignore you if you start sending messages, but the true professionals that maybe had that same struggle or made that same transition from wherever they were into the security field will take you under their wing, and they will help you. They'll guide you. They'll give you maybe other personnel to reach out to and say, hey, I don't know if I'm the right person to help you with this field or this particular aspect of security, but my friend so-and-so can help. So that is the easiest way, I think, just starting off, just build your network. Don't be shy.
Right.
Yep.
So you go out to, you look for those mentors and connections and people that have been there.
Right.
To help. What kind of academic or certification things do you think are worth considering?
I think academically, it's actually expanding. I'm sure you've seen this, the degree options out there from all of our institutions. I even saw there's a doctorate in global security out there now, which wasn't available when I was looking for a doctorate a few years ago. But and even Homeland Security, when I started taking classes, my school had to pair it with emergency management, and it's separate degrees out there. So Homeland Security is just one of them. Global security, security management. There's degrees in all those aspects, or certifications from professional organizations. Like you had mentioned, ASIS International offers several different certifications based on your experience level. And the other thing is, when you're transitioning and you're looking for those certifications, don't narrow yourself down. Open up your scope and be broad about maybe different areas of security. That's right. There's so many different aspects. So look at those certifications with the lens of what you may have done in the past, that experience that you have, and hey, how can I translate this? How does this fit in in, taking it from, my world, what that was the Army, how does that fit in with now the civilian sector and the corporate world? And there's people and resources out there that will help you guide you in that process too.
Yeah, it's interesting. So people will try to get they'll get themselves pigeonholed. But if you look as an example in crisis response or incident management, you can't really do an effective risk assessment without knowing how long does it take you to respond and recover. You want to prevent it from happening, but then afterwards is the risk where you can immediately respond and you can recover immediately, or the cost is so low that it changes the risk assessment. So you have to have some understanding of all those areas at some point. I think most people would agree you end up being exposed to everything.
You do, yeah, and that's where some people might get themselves tripped up on, hey, I'm not the expert in this area, I can't apply for this job, I don't have what they're looking for, but you may, it's the whole package. You may have aspects of incident response, but also you have that college background or certification or research. Maybe you've done some research in your past that there's a combination of factors of that you have. You don't trip yourself up just because you're not that exact subject matter expert. Yeah, you may have some expertise or some knowledge of it from some prior experience.
Right. And then you have to open yourself up to learn some new things.
That's yes.
It'll be very difficult to. It's very rare. It does happen where there's a job that somebody's looking for, and it's like, oh, they wrote this for me. It's perfectly me.
Right.
It's never perfectly.
Right.
It's close to you maybe, or it's 50% you, and then you have to learn the other 50%.
Yeah. Yeah, so. Yeah. If you're the right person they're looking for too, and you're a good cultural fit for that position, that's part of it as well.
Yeah. Well, so let's kind of shift gears a little bit, but I think related to it, I know you're pretty passionate about helping people transition from the military into these jobs. So tell us, kind of give us the perspective and the kind of advice that you give to people that are looking to make that jump.
Sure, yeah. I think we'd already mentioned before this podcast that I could talk for hours on this, and I have. I've presented at GSX, ASIS's annual conference on this topic. Myself with some other committee members, we are a lot of us are passionate about there. So, if you are a transitioning military member, again, reach out on that network on LinkedIn and find those people. There's a lot of people out there that are willing to help. So mentorship is one of them. Again, I love being a mentor to help others just based on my own personal experiences and help people make those connections of where they want to be and give them that advice. So find a mentor. Give yourself plenty of time to prepare if you have the ability to. If you know when you're, separating from service, if you have a future date, 2 years is not too early to prepare. 2 years is absolute perfect time to start that preparation, where you can take your transition workshop, and you can take that workshop multiple times when you're coming out of the military. I did. So it gives you a breather, and it helps you, when you get closer to your retirement or to your ETS, you're not overly nervous about, what am I going to do? You don't start freaking out because you're not sure what the future holds if you give yourself that time. Yeah. So that's one of the big pieces of advice. The other thing I would say, Rich, is that there's so many resources out there. Organizations, nonprofit organizations, government organizations. The list is very extensive of just people and areas that are willing to help in all aspects. So, don't go it alone. Find somebody. If you need help writing your resume, oh my God, there's organizations out there, you send them your information and even just a base resume, and they'll help create it for you, very professionally looking. And this is what they do. That's their job, is to help you write a resume. They can give you an interview prep. I utilized that resource. I had a particular job that I had applied for. I sent the job announcement to the organization. I said, can somebody help me with this? And they found somebody to just give me a mock interview. And it was very, very valuable. I ended up getting that job. Don't go it alone. Use those resources. So again, I will say, just to wrap it up. So network, find a mentor, prepare, and use your resources.
Yeah, but absolutely great advice. And I could, even before people had formalized it, when I retired 22 years ago or so. So my eyes were opened in that time by I had kind of written a resume because I was working on my doctorate. I was going to go teach school, but I said, well, I'm going to see what's out there. So anyway, I handed it to an individual before they called it transition programs, and he looked at it and he said, let me ask you a couple of questions. He said, what's as a commander, what was the the value of the facilities that you managed? Yeah, at 200 million about. He goes, how many people? 2,000. So he starts, and then he writes this out. And I think military members kind of discount what they do,
right?
And they need help translating it.
They do, and I'm so glad you said that. I was actually part of a special project for ASIS, and if you go onto their website, ASISonline.org, I believe is what it is. Yes, ASISonline.org, and go into professional development. There's something called Military to Civilian Career Resources for U.S. Army is the only one that's posted right now. U.S. Air Force is short to be posted on there. But it's online, and it's actually a career mapping tool. So it can take your career. So the Army, we focused on MPs. You don't have to be an MP, but hopefully this will help you out. And you can look at that career map, whether you were an officer, a warrant officer, or enlisted, and it shows you the equivalent in the civilian world of where you should be applying and what you should be doing. And we also created a terminology guide for our fellow ASIS colleagues to say, hey, well, what does it mean? You just said this word. What is a battalion? What is a brigade? What is that equivalent to? And so we helped create a guide to civilianize, right, certain terminology to help people transition.
Yeah. It's civilians that are looking, they really don't know what you're saying.
Right.
And
nothing against it. It's not ignorance. No. It's just
but if you translate it for them, that's 2,000 people, or that's the money. It's about impact and results and what you did, and so if you follow that kind of one, it's pretty important. So that's important.
Right.
I think we see a lot of people. We have a lot of. In fact, we've had at least two I know of who did the equivalent of the old bootstrap programs, where they came out to the university and they did the Homeland Security certificate while they were doing the OM program, and then went back to the military. And they came in person, took a few of my classes, and so it applies. It's something they already had a skill set, and so it was pretty important. They gave them another perspective, the civilian side. Let's shift gears a little bit about instant command and your perspective on that. It has dramatically changed in the civilian world. In the military, it was that's what it was. We knew, we understood an ops center, we understood if an instant, who the instant commander was, we got it, because that was half what we're doing was responding to an attack. So, but now in the civilian world, you'll see this instant command and command structures more and more developed and getting more and more formal. And even though I have friends in the industry, and they'll tell me their structure, and I'm like, that sounds a lot like the Air Force's
Yep.
structure 30
Mhm.
years ago. I said, no, we did this from scratch. I'm like, I don't think so. So anyway, talk about about where that's going. This
Yeah.
this idea of both of crisis response and incident
Mhm.
management, operations centers, and how those are building.
Right. Yeah. The technology again that we're talking about earlier, a lot of that's coming into play. We have virtual EOCs now, where we have people connected all over the world in our operations centers, and it's instant. So any global event, from a natural disaster to a mass shooting, wildfires, all that is instant notification. And so, with a virtual environment, you have all your ESFs, your emergency support functions, capable of collaborating just right there on the computer. They could be in their house, but they're communicating, an emergency situation instantly with their partners, and creating that there's not the delay that maybe we would have seen in that past.
Yeah, we're waiting for people to show up.
Right.
The OC would stand up because
Yeah.
an incident would happen, and then you're waiting for two people that were an hour away
Mm-hmm.
for them to show up because
Yep.
they're the ones that had the duty of the day or
Mm-hmm.
whoever, and they're not there, so
Mm-hmm.
you're missing a link where you can
Yeah.
instantaneously do that.
Yeah, and the quality of communication now. You're not
Right.
you're not missing that one piece, or somebody said one thing, another person said another. You can see instantly how everyone's collaborating.
So when we talk about, first off, it looks nearly all the companies a little different. But when I look at the responses and how they've set their policies up, it looks, very much like the Incident Command Center. All the things. I mean, you could take a course in FEMA and have a 70% solution of most places because it's a government-designed thing. But there's always some differences. So, I mean, do you think the importance is the subject matter expert in industrial places? So, whether it's Walmart or whoever, that you bring those people in that can tell you impacts, or I mean, that's different
Mm-hmm.
than the government is.
Right. Yeah. I think being a large global organization, you have more of those siloed subject matter experts. So you have the benefit of that as long as you can tap that resource, as long as you know how to bring those people in and utilize it.
Which, I personally have been involved on both, government, military, and industry, where we didn't even know we needed that person until suddenly somebody said, we really don't know anything about this. Does anybody know how this works? Supply chain's one that was, so, that's dramatically changed. And having someone that understands the systems is important. So,
yeah.
So when we look at those types of things, as far as an operations manager, one of the things is leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very interesting, I find, in our program, as an example, that not just in the Homeland Security Certificate, but all of operations management, always two of the highest rated courses that we have is our leadership and the change course.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. It's nothing for most people that have done a 20-year military career. The leadership course is nothing really earth-shattering. It's like, well, okay, most of that stuff you learn as an E4.
Yeah, or you have professional development
Right,
as you go through your career.
Yeah, and so you professional military education did that. But for people hearing it for the first time, some of it's quite life-changing for them, about how to motivate people and those sorts of things. What do you see as the leadership challenges, like for someone that's an operations manager and focused in some security area? What do you think those challenges are now, today?
I think one of the biggest challenges is putting the right people in the right place.
Mm.
So yeah, we have a lot of great leaders out there. What are their skills? What are their skill sets? What are their strengths and weaknesses? And as a leader, you need to know your people, and you need to know their strengths and weaknesses, and be able to pluck them and put them in the right place and say, hey, we have an incident over here. Well, if it's a weather event, hey, maybe I've got somebody that just did their internship,
Right.
at National Weather Center or something,
Right.
and they have that background. If it's, an event that's more law enforcement related, okay, well, maybe I've got somebody that has a law enforcement background that can speak the speak. I'm going to put them in that operations center alongside our law enforcement partners or our state partners that, they can, they're talking the same language there, kind of thing. So I think as a leader, definitely knowing your people. Yeah.
So that something that you mentioned there that's really important, I think, is this idea of partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
So early on back in the day with the op centers, that was your organization. It was the rarest things. I mean, where outside people in the military, even outside other services.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you had to stand up a joint duty assignment in order to have those people there. So, but that's dramatically changed. People from the outside, people from, you may have a different relationship, a vendor relationship, or industry and government partnerships. Talk a little bit about how important it is to manage those skills.
Yeah. Again, you have to have everybody's collaboration and their background and their expertise. So, when we had civil unrest in Little Rock, I was in the EOC for the state police EOC there, as a representative of the National Guard. We had our helicopters flying above, and I was operating the video from below, and was working alongside not just the state police, but the FBI, the DEA, other National Guard entities, as we were heavily involved in that response. So everybody has their little piece of the pie, and it's how those little pieces of the pie come and work together. In Walmart, we send people out, we deploy people for all kinds of events to work in other state EOCs. And it might be something as simple as just having that person in that EOC that can answer, hey, we need more bottled water. How do we facilitate getting bottled water to these civilians on the ground that need it? And that's what that person is there for, to just facilitate something maybe even as simple as that, but logistically it could be very troublesome. So,
well, yeah, with hurricanes, as an example, if you haven't pre-positioned stuff, then you're behind and you will never catch up.
Right.
You'll never catch up. So, you have to have these plans ahead of time to know what's happening, and that requires government, industry, and others to work together.
Exactly.
So in that. You talked a little bit about in the leadership about putting people in the right position, but how about when someone, we touched on it before, but somebody's wanting to change positions? We have people in our home, someone who's a supply chain person, and they've decided, I'm interested in learning something about drones because I want to be involved in the last mile thing and the innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Or someone who is in a traditional role in whether it's supply chain or in the retail or other side of any company, but they say, well, but we've got this compliance, Homeland Security compliance requirements, and so I want to transition over.
Mm-hmm.
When someone's making that choice, what kind of advice would you give them? It's kind of like the military thing, but at the same time, these are people within the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure you see people in Walmart that want to transition.
Mm-hmm. And they do, yeah.
And so is there advice you have for them that's different than the military about transitioning, or is it the same kind of thing about mentoring and looking for that?
I think it's mostly kind of the same. You want to find somebody who's doing maybe what you want to do, if there is a position that you're interested in. And I think most places they would be comfortable with you shadowing someone and just say, hey, I'm interested in learning what you do. I don't want, I'm not trying to take your job.
Right.
You don't want to, scare somebody into thinking that you're there to overtake their job. Yeah, just reaching out, asking for that personal advice. I think a lot of people would be willing to talk about how they got where they are. Whether if it's a certification that they need, then this is what you need to pursue, and then kind of outline it from there.
And the certifications are great. Now there's a there's a little bit difference. So like if you're doing a vulnerability assessment, the government will use a C for consequence, while ASIS uses an I for impact.
Yes.
It's really the same thing.
Yes, there's several ways you can do it.
So sometimes you have to kind of have a translator just to know, hey, well, this really means the same thing. Let's talk a little bit about design and physical security. We see this a lot, but I mean, one of the courses that we have is not just crisis management, but it's also resilient design. So talk some about, how do you design resilience? What are kind of those elements you see when we're trying to design a resilient facility, what that means? Everybody seems like there's a lot of different ideas about what that means.
Yeah. Good question, because I think you have to be dynamic. One of the things with your resilient design, there's so many things that are changing, and you have to be resilient. As
Right.
it says. So how do you do that? You have to be aware of the things that can change. So is it the political environment? Is that something that's going to have an impact depending on what your organization is, what they do? Is the political environment going to affect that somehow? Are you near the coast? Is again a hurricane or a tsunami wherever you are, is something like that going to impact you, or a tornado? So how do you plan around something like that? Some things that are unpredictable.
Right.
You can't predict tornadoes in every case. So civil unrest, something happens on the street today. How do you handle that? So there's a lot of things that you can conduct an assessment for that may kind of be the same threats you see yearly, but then you've got to think outside the box and say, hey, what else do we see? What other risks are here that could be changing, or something we haven't seen in the past?
So you think too as well when you're designing. So you've got security in depth. So like layers of security. So no single points of failure when you can. And then responses, which we talked about. And then how you recover from that.
Yeah.
The recovery part, people kind of discount sometimes, and they don't really, they're like, in those cases when you do an assessment and you've got a branding. Target had a horrible branding issue with some credit cards some Christmases ago, 4 or 5 years ago, and people lost their brand, suffered. So people were afraid to use their cards for a while. So the recovery, though, was the piece. It wasn't that it happened. It was the recovery because it persisted. So are there any hints that security managers would look at when they're trying to look at resilience about recovery? Because it's never the stuff that I mean, everybody's got the book that has civil unrest, cyber attack.
You've got your plan book.
You got the plan book, right?
Yeah.
It's always the one that's like, oh, we never thought about that before. That's never happened before.
Yeah.
We didn't anticipate it before. And so, talk a little bit about that uncertainty for all those.
The uncertainty, I think, is something like with Target, you have to be honest, right? Just come out and say, oops,
Right.
Hey, maybe we could have handled this situation better, and maybe a little quick research and say, hey, what has this happened to somebody else before? Like some benchmarking of some sort. Reach out to other organizations, be humble about it.
Right.
I guess is the only piece of advice I can give. Security managers, if there's something that you're unsure of how to respond to, um, see how others may have responded before if it's something that has occurred before. Yeah.
So uh, and the admission that it's not going to be perfect. I've counted,
Right.
I think, at least 6 and maybe 7 times that I've received letters from the government since I've retired twice now. First from the Air Force and then Homeland.
Security breach.
Yeah, that they, that somebody in the government, OPM,
LPM.
because my
Yep.
my security clearance was held there, that they had a breach and my information was out there. So the government doesn't have
I
it
got
right
that
either.
same notification.
I've got it several times, and they want to give me 1 year of credit monitoring.
Exactly. Yep. That's the fix.
But I guess in the end, the question is just like you said, if you're honest about it and then just move forward to try to figure it out. Most people you can recover
Right.
branding if you say, this is an important thing,
Right.
and not try to cover it up. The cover up's always the worst.
Exactly.
So let's shift gears a little bit into design. I've talked about this before, and just yesterday, the day before, but this, the CSO and the CISO and the CIO and the interactions, and no matter what anybody says, and I have a lot of friends in ASIS around the country, around the world, and they'll all make an argument. Oh, this is where it's going. I don't think it's true at all. I never see the same organization anywhere.
Right.
About who reports to who and how that structure works. And honestly, unfortunately, some of the organizations, it's like the organization du jour. So for a while, it was like all cybersecurity, so we're doing that. And someone said, well, wait a minute. We've got all these things going on, so maybe we ought to have a CISO and them work, or CSO and work. So give us your perspective a little bit on organization, because I think for folks, whether they were going to do a certification or if they're in our Homeland certificate or considering that or transition from the military, they need to understand a little bit. If you want to know, what a career path looks like, you probably ought to know what the organization looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
So, but where do you think that's going? I mean, is there anything as far as global organizations that you see, like at ASIS, any research that you've seen?
I think every organization is different. Like you said, some organizations don't know where to put those cybersecurity people now. Are they IT or are they security?
Right.
It's or are we doing this dotted line thing? I don't even know what that means. So everyone's different and it's changing. One thing I have seen too is that, you may start out with a certain structure and then it could be reactive to an event or different leadership. So leadership focus at a company is also what can change the organization structure and say, hey, we realized maybe we were lacking in this area. And we want to strengthen it. So we're going to put more emphasis on our global security, more specifically in such and such area. So I think that's one thing that corporations are seeing is it's leadership dependent on what maybe their level of risk is and what their level of risk acceptance is. What are we going to accept and what do we need to make sure is our strong suits? Yeah. So it's different
fluid.
Everywhere.
Yeah, it's fluid, right?
Right.
I had a great mentor, a 2-star, that told me, said, if you want to send an emphasis, if you want to tell your people what's important, there's 2 ways that you do it. Number 1 is who you say it's accountable to. So is it the C-suite, a C-suite member that's accountable for that? Once you say that, people are like, oh, okay. And the second is if you measure it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say the C-suite, this high-level person's accountable for it, and by the way, we're going to measure this, then suddenly you've told them it's important.
Mm-hmm.
But the fluidity of that now, I find it amazing,
right?
How fluid it is. And I mean, kind of, it's like these seismic shifts that happened every 20 years, now look like they're happening every 20 months.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly it's a brand new idea of, well, we need to shift here, we need to combine these. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it just what's the hot button topic?
Well, and about what's the threat,
Right.
right? So what's the risk today?
Exactly.
And where is the real threat
Yep.
from that? So, well, let me shift gears a little bit to the use and understanding of business intelligence. I've had a conversation or two about whether or not we needed to actually add a course, because the utility of intelligence and security operations, and in crisis management or the rest of it, has changed. Talk a little bit about, because if I say that today to an operations manager, so that understands operation, doing all those, managing a budget, looking at all these things, managing people, doing all the stuff a traditional operations manager does, but focused on security. And then I say business intelligence. To the MBA student, that means one thing. But to an operations manager that has an element of security, it means something very different. So it's not really business continuity exactly. So talk a little bit about the use of intelligence and business intelligence and why it's important.
Well, what comes to my mind when you say that is more of the ESRM approach.
Right.
So, you're looking at your enterprise security risk management. How are you bringing the needs of the company and supporting that with your security functions? And how are you all working together? So, so business intelligence is having those goals and objectives of your business, of your organization, but then still supporting, how do we support that with the security function? So my job as the, overseeing that risk assessment program is, it's up to me to say, hey, this is our level of risk based on these factors from a security perspective. And it's up to that leadership at that level to say, okay, well, this is what's going to be our priority. So based on what their knowledge is of the business, I'm just a subject matter expert on the security side. I don't know what their goals are for the business side. So I think, you have to tie that all in together. And that's how to become successful, you have to have those same objectives, because if I'm pushing too much on the security side, it might go against what a positive outcome maybe for the business somehow.
Yeah, what a great, so enterprise security risk management is a great segue. And when you mention that, because of the fact that it is this understanding, you can, I'll give you a risk management thing. Like when I was learning to fly, I remember my CFI one day, been a long time ago, but anyway, he said, I know how we can manage the risk completely. And I said, how's that? He said, we won't fly today.
There you go.
And so you have to accept it's risk management, not risk elimination. And it's not liability management either, which attorneys sometimes want to look to. Totally different. So, but I think your point is well taken. You have to look at it as a system and then use that enterprise security as a system and how they interact with everybody. Well, so, Mikaela, we're coming to the end nearly here, but the last thing I wanted to ask you is you've got quite a bit of experience now in military, government, and industry. What do you think is the one challenge, this one most important challenge that you think there is about this ops manager that has security functions for them to integrate into the business? Kind of goes with ESRM, right?
Right, exactly. They tie in.
Right. So, but what do you think's what's in your opinion the number one challenge there is to do?
I think balancing your mitigation effectively. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, to determine your most significant threats and mitigating those effectively with keeping everyone safe and secure at the same time.
Yeah. It's really tough to figure out where that balance is sometimes.
Right.
And what the trade-offs are and to analyze that. We actually have a course in trade-off analytics to look at that. That's quantitative, but I mean, there's qualitative views to do that.
Right.
That are more sophisticated too. Well, that's all I've got for today. Mikaela, thank you very much for coming in and sharing your perspective. And for those that are listening, if you're thinking about any of our programs, Mikaela's teaching crisis management this time, or
Homeland Security in the spring.
Okay,
Yep.
so Homeland Security in the spring, and then you've taught crisis before, right? So a great instructor that's going to have real world experience if you're interested, and certainly you could get that in several of the areas we have in Homeland Security. Thank you again for giving us your perspective.
This was fun. Thank you.
Thanks for your perspective, and that'll wrap it up for us today. And at the end of the program, you'll get an opportunity to see how you can find out more information in any of the areas we talked about today.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Before you go, if you enjoyed today's conversations, would you mind leaving us a review on whatever podcast platform that you're listening on? Our goal is education and helping people improve their professional skills and knowledge to advance in their careers, and positive reviews help others learn about our programs. Thanks, and we'll catch you on the next episode.